Welcome to Creative Power, a podcast designed to help you claim the full spectrum of your creative potential. I'm Camilla Fellis-Arnold, and I'm passionate about discussing how we change the face of both the creative industries and how we interact with creativity itself, so that it nourishes our soul and helps us express ourselves with alignment, flow, and authenticity. Let's get started. Welcome to Creative Power. I am here once again with the fabulous Emily Tuck, who is going to talk to us about the summer solstice, which is today, and the festival of Litha and the impact that it will have on creativity. I find this really, really interesting because last time when she was here was at the beginning of May, and we were talking about Beltane moving us into a fire season. And what has happened for me since then is I've started in the last few episodes, there hasn't been any. When I would normally put out an episode on a Tuesday, I haven't put any new episodes out for at least 3 weeks because I've been struggling with the fire myself. I've been feeling burnt out. So we're now at this halfway point, the summer solstice, because this is the minor festival, as Emily would say. So Emily is here to kind of explain to us, what do we do now if we're already halfway through this 12-week window and we're feeling a bit burnt out? How can we regroup ourselves? What is coming up next for us with Litha? So Emily, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
It's a pleasure to have you.
I think we'll start with talking about what happened with you around the episodes, the missing episodes, as it were, because it's a very good example, and you're not the only person I have seen where this has happened. So what happened when we entered Beltane, which was the last time I was here, Beltane was the 1st of May, we moved from the wood and the spring into the start of summer and the fire element in the Chinese 5 elements. Now, that fire element gives the implication of go, 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 lots of activity. We move from be into do. So if you listen to the previous episode, that's what I was talking around. Hahowever, what it also does is within the fire element, you have the triple warmer, you have the adrenal system. Now, what happens if you're somebody who has been go, go, go for so long that actually there's too much do, too much go, and not enough of something else?
Well, that's an interesting way to think about it.
What can actually happen is it's almost like as you step into fire, it has its own innate energy about it, but you're adding that to the process. And I find this when I'm working with clients, when we're dealing with, when I begin working with clients, when I do their original medical history, understanding about who they are, what's their backstory. One of the questions I often ask them is, are you awake in the middle of the night? And if so, what time? Because it tells me which part of their systems are over-energized.
Oh, okay.
Because each meridian has its active time of day. They have a 2-hour window when they are most active and most receptive. So the best time to eat breakfast is when your stomach meridian is most active and receptive at 7 in the morning. Good diet tip: if you want to become leaner, have a bigger breakfast and then eat less during the day, because actually sumo wrestlers are famous for only eating after the stomach time has finished, because otherwise it boosts the metabolism too much.
Oh wow, did not know that. That's fascinating.
So they never eat before 11 in the morning, because otherwise their metabolism would work too well, they'd be too lean and they couldn't be sumo wrestlers. So let's use the opposite in our advantage. But what I was going to say is that as people come around to certain times of day or night where they can't sleep, what happens is they've already used quite a bit of energy in this area for other reasons. So, for example, they might be creating the new projects in the wood that we spoke about in our previous episode.
Yes.
But the meridians that belong to that are the liver and gallbladder. And what happens is they have their own natural surge. Gallbladder has a natural surge at 11 o'clock at night, and liver takes over at 1 in the morning. And so between 11 and 3, if you've been using that liver energy and that wood energy to create new projects, to plan new things, to do all of that, and you then get round to 11 o'clock at night, suddenly you're awake. Or you went to bed at 10, now suddenly you're wide awake at 1 in the morning. Because the extra surge that naturally occurs at that time for liver or for gallbladder is enough to bring you out of a sleep state.
Wow.
So you actually wake up at that time of day or night so I always look for when are you awake or asleep in the sleep cycle, because it tells me where there's an oversurge of that energy. Because if the natural energy that would be there anyway is always in play, it's always going to be having that little surge for 2 hours. But now we've got extra, enough to bring you out of your sleep state, then it shows me an imbalance. So let's look at fire in the same way. What happens is that you go into this stage in May and it builds and it goes right the way through. So we've talked about it here, and we'll talk about it again when we come around to the next one. We're only just beginning to think about Earth, because that's the 1st of August. So if fire lasts quite a while, it lasts a good chunk of the 5 element time. What happens is if fire's already got enough going on, because we are naturally adrenalized, life is stressful, we're stressing ourselves out with our jobs, our food, trying to be everything to everybody, doing stuff we don't want to do.
We also have fire in terms of the weather. It's heating up. I mean, yesterday the temperatures were 33 degrees. It was absolutely roasting. So that adds to the pot as well.
So all of those things now mean that if you were naturally balanced in your fire element, but you also had the heat of the season, the humidness, and in Britain, particularly as opposed to the southern hemisphere or in the northern hemisphere, our houses are built to retain heat because predominantly we're cold.
And we don't have aircon. It's not a thing for us.
So this heat has nowhere to go. So now, if I said to you, right, let's spend time in fire, do, go, this has the equivalent effect on your adrenal system and on your fire element as it would if you were waking up in the middle of the night, because it's too much energy. So you are one of the people, and I've dealt with a couple of my clients like this, where actually, if the objective of using the element well is not that it is fired up, although that may be the case, it's actually to bring it into balance.
Yes.
So if you're somebody who now goes into fire and wants to use it for do, I, for example, don't have an imbalance in my fire element, and I have been in a high activity period. I've been doing calls, I've been talking to people, I've been networking left, right, and actually being a human design generator. It's like, there's the fire. Use the fire with the 5 elements.
And it's sustaining itself as well.
So it's a fire, in my case, that is like a fire under a cauldron. It's cooking something. So if you're somebody who is over-adrenalized or overstressed, or maybe once upon a time you have suffered from heat stroke, who knows what threw your fire element out, right? Now this is not the fire that's cooking under a cauldron. This is a fire element that is burning out fast. So the best way to bring you into a balanced fire element is actually to do fractionally less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you feel that overburn, how do you step back? How do you allow your fire to go from a towering inferno that takes over the whole house and destroys everything in its wake, and actually now simmers down to the same as mine, which is the cauldron, the fire under the cauldron that is cooking something. So in your case, you listened to your natural rhythm and didn't push yourself past and make an episode of something when you were just exhausted.
Because the thing is, I actually knew what I was going to do these episodes about, but the day that I sat down to do the recording, I could feel it in myself. I didn't have the headspace for it. I didn't have the energy or the excitement to do it. And I just thought, instead of mugging myself about that, which I historically would have done, I thought, okay, don't worry. It is what it is. you just sometimes got to let it go for your own sake.
And so when we first started this series, we started with in bulk.
Yes, we did.
And in bulk is the water element. So, and it was all about letting things incubate and letting things settle. Well, in a way, you allowed a little water into your over-fired environment. Your internal environment was over too much fire. So we doused the fire with a little water. And so you allowed these ideas of episodes to incubate a little longer. Just let them sit for a while. And then they can come out at a time and at a, I'm going to use the word temperature for want of a better word, but at a stream of kind of heat that sits right.
Yes.
When you've got it settled and regulated and balanced, then these episodes can come out. And it's a much better experience for you. It's a much better experience for your listener.
Of course, yeah, because no one, you can feel people's energy when they're not in it, when they're phoning it in, you can tell. And I don't want to bring that energy to these episodes. So, you know, people may have noticed that there was a few episodes missed for a few weeks, but actually in terms of the output of quality, that was for the best. And you know what, we're still only at that halfway point in the fire season, so there's still the opportunity, those things that I was going to talk about which were relevant to the season are still going to be useful for me to talk about over the next few weeks. So they'll come into their own. I have still got time to wrap things up and move things forward, but at a pace that works for me, rather than, you know, just trying to do with everyone else. Because there is that energy and excitement because it's summer. We've got beautiful weather. People want to go out and do all the things. And I think it's so easy for people to kind of get caught up in that and think we all have to do the same. We have to keep up with each other. We have to be in all the places at once.
So when we're looking at this fire element at this time of year, we've talked just now about how actually we can gently douse that fire. So now let's talk about the other side of the equation, where maybe that person's fire is imbalanced or it actually needs the natural firing up. So this is about doing. This is in terms of be-do habits, the do phase still, and there's activity. However, what's interesting about Litha as a festival is we are just beginning to get the herbs. It's not quite the harvest lives in August, but the medicinal herbs and the herbs that traditionally were part of like kind of magic work would begin to harvest now. So you could go out and you could pick those things. What's the magic that we need at this time to bring us through? What's the alchemical piece that has begun to mature? And it's the beginning of what have we planted back in the spring. When we were talking about Ostara, what were the seeds you were planting that would harvest? We still have the main harvest to come August and September. We're going to see a big yield. However, you see the increments and the beginnings of harvest. And what happens is that what's the beginnings of those? What's the things that are beginning to take a shape? Are we maybe getting one person that signed up for a program instead of 5? Have we maybe started to build the relationships that later will have a much bigger yield? Also, what do we need to help that continue? What else do we need? We're still in the doing phase. So what's the other piece of high activity that needs to occur to keep that in motion? It's also a phase of, and it's about being able to go, do you know what? That has begun. I can see this part of a small harvest.
It's important to honour it within yourself. And also, I think we talked about this in the Beltane episode. Think about the things that really feed your soul, the things that will give you that life force, that energy to sustain you. You know, they may not be the creative projects, but the other things that will build up your reserves.
What will feed the fire?
Yes.
So if we're talking about that cooking cauldron, you know, we talked about how we don't want the never-ending porridge pot version, but we also want to be able to, what is it that we need to, that puts fire in our belly that will nurture what we're cooking and what we're still percolating and what's still is being germinated, really. So interestingly, I read somewhere that when I was learning about this generally, is that the solstice translates, because obviously it's the summer solstice, is also another name for this festival. Solstice literally means the sun stands still, because it's the longest day. It literally stands still.
Beautiful.
It's such a beautiful idea that we're celebrating the light over the dark.
That's powerful. I like that.
So we can look at that on all kinds of levels, like what's happening in your life that you can say this is light over dark. I'm celebrating the fact that over the last few months I've been working through something and now there's this light over dark. Also, within the creativity, what have you done to transform the narrative and make it something that's light or joyful? Because the emotion that belongs to the fire element is joy. So where's the joy, or maybe the lack of it? Are we having trouble regulating that joy? Because the historical narrative, which I know you are working very hard to transform, is this, the wounded artist and the
starving artist, suffering
the starving artist, and the suffering artist. So with that is, where's the joy in it? What's the things that bring you joy? But also, if that's the case, if we're celebrating that light over dark, where in our own lives, maybe in our own creative practice, maybe in the way that we approach ourselves as a creative person, where is there light that's winning over that dark narrative? Where are we? What are the steps we're taking? What are we doing that's bringing that about? And with that, you also have this idea of, we were talking earlier about the fire, using the water against the fire. Well, Europeans historically celebrate this festival by taking a large wheel, setting it alight, and rolling it down a hill. But more importantly, they roll it through water. It's this idea of the water, because the heat is so intense as we hit the peak of the summer. Actually, this water, and it's this water fire.
That's incredible. How you can see the connection between the two. That's really, really fascinating. And I know for me, I did previously do a lot of work on my water element before I got to realise that fire is now the issue. But the link between them is really quite fascinating. So in terms of creatives who feel that they want to work with this energy, what would you say to them?
I think the first thing you need to do, or first thing I would suggest, is tune into yourself. And I mean your authentic self, not the version of you that society approves of, or can I be that creative? Am I allowed to be that avant-garde? Am I allowed to? Never mind that for a second. Tune into you and tune into the creative energy of whatever it is you're trying to put out into the world, or that you're literally burning to put out into the world. And then ask yourself, does it need more fire? Do you need with the fire element, they all have different attributes and properties, and one of the attributes is a smell. So each element has a smell, and the smell of fire is scorched, like a barbecue.
Oh, okay.
So are we too scorched by life, the universe, everything? Our creativity, our lack of creativity, trying to fit our square peg in a round hole, whatever. Or do we need to take a risk and take the risk of being scorched a little because it helps the process to occur? So I would tune into that, and I would feel into it and say, right, what does it feel like I'm scorched? Does it feel like I need to take a risk, and I might be a bit scorched, but it's okay. And with that scorching also becomes that metaphor of like the witch wound or the persecution, because I'm doing something outside of what people expect. I was going to say outside of time, but in that kind of, people create something that's ahead of their time.
That's a quite interesting thought, actually, because that can often be where people do tend to stall in their creative process, because somewhere in their thoughts, in their subconscious, maybe it's conscious thoughts, they're thinking about the end result when it's something tangible, what people are going to say. And that does then, as you said, activate that witch wound, that remembering in our ancient, ancestral DNA of being burnt at the stake. So then there's almost that fear that kind of puts a pause on what you're doing because you're too frightened of the outcome to keep moving in the process.
And interestingly, I wasn't going to say this when we started, but you've explained it so well, I'm going to. It's that blend then of the fire and the water. So water is about fear, but water is also the seat of our courage.
Nice, like that.
So where can we find the courage? Where can we go from being frozen and terrified into trusting and going with the flow? And this idea of the drop in the ocean, well, it's like the metaphorical canvas. If your brushstroke is missing, the canvas is not the same. So there's that side. And then with the fire, it's that risk of are we going to be burned metaphorically or not? But also we risk it for our art. But then we don't need to risk it for our art because we need to like slave over it. It's actually allowing that fire to be gently generating and gently creating and consistently doing so. So in my presentation, it shows up that I can keep going and have been going now for about 4 or 5 weeks. It's just go, go, go. And it's relatively showing no signs of stopping, but it's also hit a rhythm that I can keep.
Yes.
And so it's about allowing that. What does it need? Does it need more of this or less of that? And allow the two, I guess. I wasn't going to talk about water, but actually it's about allowing that fire-water balance to allow you to get the most out of it. So the other part with that can be, it's about being outside. It's about being in nature. It's about being out in the sunshine. So whether that's going for a picnic, whether that is walking barefoot on the grass, whether that is, I'm going to take my sketch pad and I'm going to do something outside.
Really grounding yourself.
Exactly. You could be somebody who just wanders around in the forests and the trees around you and picks up things. And you might be someone who goes and does like tree rubbings. It doesn't have to be lots of different, fiery things. But what it does is it keeps you in nature. It keeps you looking at the abundance of the harvest that's out there. So there's lots of different ways to kind of bring it around.
I find for me, particularly, I've been struggling with the fire of this season. I've been feeling burnt out and overwhelmed, exhausted by the process. And for me, going for my walks, because I've got 2 dogs, so at least twice a day I am going for a walk somewhere, and I keep going back to the woods. I'm getting in all the trees rather than going over the fields where it's all open spaces. I want to be around all the greenery.
But what you're also being around is the canopy and the break in the sun beating down on you.
Yes.
So for you, as somebody who has too much fire, it's a way to be out in the nature and in the fire element and in the summer, but still have a cooling impact.
I think that's really an important lesson for us to learn, to find a way to to enjoy the season creatively and throughout the rest of your life, but in a way that works for you, that doesn't burn you out. So like I said, that is how I approach it. Whereas you or someone else may find that no, they're happy out in the fields in the beating sun. There's no one right way to approach this. Much like creativity, it's all up to interpretation.
And there's one other thing I want to just bring in is the idea or the concept of emotional, and I'm going to expand that concept. It's emotional, it's spiritual, but I'm now going to expand it to creative dehydration.
Ooh.
So where has there not been enough of the creativity? Where have we buried it? Whatever. And what it creates is a dehydration in the body. Now the dehydration comes about in part because there's not enough water against the amount of fire. So I'm somebody who on one occasion lay asleep on a field, and everybody was out and about doing a thing, and the conversation around me was just boring. I couldn't help it. And I thought the best way to cope with this is to pretend to be asleep. Then I don't have to engage in the conversation. So I did. And then I promptly fell asleep. And then I heard people saying we should probably wake her up because she's been in the sun too long. So they did. They woke me up, and that was fine. The next day, I thought I had a horrendous migraine, and the next day I felt even worse. But it transpired I had dehydration and heat stroke because I'd sat out in the sun. So in that moment, there was too much fire and not enough. There was no shade. I didn't have a hat on, all of those things. And I created this moment. And what happens is your body copes with like a heat stroke like that, and it stores it because what else can it do? It makes the compensation that it can, but it creates too much fire. And then it goes, what do we do now? Okay, we bear it, we make the adjustment, and we carry on with our lives. But it's only done on the surface. So, for example, all the advice about cooling your body temperature down and drinking plenty of water, that's fine. You reset yourself a little, but you only really do it on the surface because if you like the trauma effect or the, oh my God, what's happened here, imbalance that you create gets buried and it becomes suppressed. So later, I found myself doing some holistic treatment and I was the client. And we did something around suppressed dehydration. Well, out came this fire of this was years later, but because the instruction was, it was a demonstration about suppressed dehydration, they'd expected a small demonstration of something, where I might drink a little bit more water to prove the point. They didn't know I'd suffered from heat stroke, and out came this dehydration. Well, I thought I was dying. I was drinking gallons of water in maybe a half hour space. Now, the good news about this is that suppressed dehydration hit the surface and off I went. It passes. It's just passing through your body as it's coming out. It's not terminal. But the water that I was getting rid of, and they just kept handing it to me. And at one point, somebody turned around, minding their own business, turned around to me, and they had their own water. And I said, quick, give me that. And I was, she was like, I thought I was being rude. But because she could see the state I was in, she didn't object. Now, I was maybe 3 pints in, 4 pints in, and then it started to settle. But the parchness and the thirst, I couldn't do anything about. But it was regulated and settled by physical water, right? Now, I made a note of that for my own professional purposes, but what I have observed in people is as they do the work around or they do something around unlocking the creative or emotional dehydration that locking away their creativity has brought about, or I can't be creative, I'm not allowed, all those stories. As we unlock that, often there is the physical symptom of thirst to a much lesser degree than when I did my heat stroke run. But to a lesser degree, they suddenly go, God, I'm really thirsty.
I've experienced it myself.
They suddenly need water. And it's not about that they drunk their normal water for the day. It's not that level of dehydration. But because we've allowed this creative dehydration to come up and be supported, it needs water and then it will settle. So keep drinking because actually it's not physical dehydration that you're solving, that you're remedying. You're remedying it in a physical fashion, but it's creative dehydration that you're solving.
That's really fascinating. I've never really thought of creative dehydration before, but actually it totally makes sense. It's one of those things that you just think,
how did I not see it before?
Yeah, you really do, because we think of like when people are just completely stuck for ideas and it's it doesn't matter how hard you work, you just can't get an idea to come to you. But that thirst for an idea, I love that as a visual, as a metaphor. Because, I've experienced it myself in my own personal transformation in terms of hunger, being hungry for something other than food, whether it's power or an experience or
God or money, but you're hungry for something that isn't food while you're wandering around your fridge going, there's nothing new in here.
Yes. So I've experienced that, but then to apply that idea to thirst, think, what are you really thirsty for? It's a really interesting thought.
What have you got dehydration for? Yeah. And suddenly it's creative dehydration. And to be honest, you said that's never occurred. It's only just occurred to me as we're talking.
We've come up with something new.
But to expand that idea of physical or nutritional dehydration into emotional, I have learned about. But the idea of it being creative, yeah, I think that's a thing. And I think it needs honouring.
It does. I think it can be so hard when we are in this season of fire and summer, and we're in that do phase, it can be really hard for people to just take that moment to stop and honor these things within ourselves, to take that breath, because we're so busy, and just actually pull it back and say, no, it's okay. I'm feeling like this today. I'm struggling with the heat. I'm struggling with this. I am creatively dehydrated.
How can I put some water in? How can I put some balance in? How can I cool that fire a little? Just a little. But what your intention is, and this is what I think is important, the intention is that it becomes a fire that can self-generate and can create something. In the doing, there is something created, not scorched. Or if you've become a little bit more scorched because you need to take a risk, it creates something, it manifests something off the tail end. So it's what do you need to do to bring that in? Rather than do 27 days of the month, crazy, go, and actually we're burned out. Because you end up with nothing to show for the harvest.
Yeah, it's not going to do anyone any favors. And then that's when all of that negative self-talk comes in, and you just mug yourself. And you know what? I've talked about the idea of the suffering artist before. The first person, in a way, when you take out everyone else's judgments, the worst person that makes us suffer is ourselves. We are our own worst enemy at times. That inner critic can get so bad. So you know what? Do yourself a favor and just honor the season that you're in, whatever you're experiencing, even if it doesn't match the physical seasons, even if it doesn't match what other people are doing. It's okay. You still have time. That idea of what you said about that sustaining fire, almost like I'm getting an image of my granddad. He had a big wood burner, like a massive one that was a back boiler, heated all the house, all the water. And what he would do is he'd fill it up with the coal right to the brim so that it would stay in overnight. You didn't have to touch it until the next day because it just would continue going all on its own. Whereas, I've got a wood burner in my house. You put wood in it and then it won't stay in overnight. It'll just burn out. Put coal in there and it will sustain itself. So it's about finding the difference for yourself creatively. This is my biggest takeaway from what you've said. Find what is going to sustain you creatively over the summer, because it's not necessarily what you think it is. You keep pushing, sometimes actually pulling back, dousing the flames a little bit to something that's just more manageable is actually the best way forward to keep you going in the long term.
If you remember that the objective is to balance use this time between Beltane on the 1st of May and right the way through to the 1st of August to balance your fire element. So as this is the midpoint between those two dates, this is the opportunity to look at what have I done in the first 6 weeks. So if we spent between now and Beltane, go, fire, and you're wondering why you're burning out, you're not going to sustain that for the next 12 weeks.
Yeah,
and you'll end up with all kinds of burnout and emotional dehydration on the way. So you can take stock at this point and go, actually, this forward motion is going to create something by the end. In my case, I think it will. I can see the pieces moving, and it's going to continue to create because it has a steady rhythm, a steady pattern all the way. But if I'm someone who's burned out, actually, I will create by doing slightly less, and then I'll still get the harvest on the tail end. But actually, what I've done, what we're both doing from opposite ends of this scale, is how do you balance the fire? So at this 6-week point, at this solstice point, what do you need to do in order to bring balance to the fire? So it might be the same as what you've done in the previous 6, but it might also be something entirely different.
And that's the beautiful thing about these midway points. You can take that moment to just pivot a little bit if you need to, just reset. So I think that was a really good moment to have this conversation, particularly for me, because not that I've been feeling too bad about not turning up to record episodes, but equally I had it in mind that I haven't turned up. And what was I going to do to keep moving forward with this?
So to your regular listeners, I think that constitutes a sorry about that. Here's what's been going on.
Yes.
And we'll see what happens. And I think, it's worth noting that whether or not that means there's an episode once a fortnight until the end of fire.
Yeah.
Maybe it will pick up a pattern. Maybe it will pick up a pattern come August when you switch into Earth. suddenly there's not, because you don't have the over and fire that is then going to galvanize you to a point where you actually can't. Because, like I said right back at the beginning of the episode, if your fire already over energized and then you put more fire in, it's the equivalent of waking up in the middle of the night and wondering why you're still awake.
Yeah.
Well, if that becomes the case, you might be better when you do what I've advised, and you, as we've advised the listeners, is tune into the creative project and feel it. Does it need more water? Does it need more fire? What does it need? If the answer is to do an episode of Fortnite until the end of fire and then revisit, because once you're in the earth energy, once you're in the earth element energy, it has a completely different feel, and your fire won't be overplaying because it's not already energized by the fact that's the season you're in.
And that's the beautiful thing about creativity. It is fluid. And what I am really, with these episodes with Creative Power, what I'm trying to encourage people to take on for themselves is that idea of being kind to yourself, finding your rhythm rather than listening to everyone else. So you know what? Taking my and your advice here and just letting it flow. If it's flowing for me, then there will be episodes. They may not be every week. They may be every week. I'm going to let it occur as it does. And that's absolutely okay. That really, really is. Listeners may miss me for a week or two, but actually we'll get better quality in the process.
And as you get that little fire under the cauldron, you may find that suddenly, I did 2 episodes this week because I was in the natural rhythm of that fire. But what it is it's about following that rhythm.
Yeah, that's a really important takeaway. Yeah, I love that. So thank you so much for coming back again and sharing all these insights with us. I definitely feel like it's given everyone that opportunity to just take that breather, maybe reset if you need to, and just show people that there's another way to do these things. You don't have to be burnt out. You don't have to struggle. And this is how we bring it back. So thank you so, so much for coming back again. You will join us again in August.
I will. I'll be back here for the harvest.
Yes. And I will, of course, as always, put links to working with Emily in the show notes, all of her things. She's doing some incredible stuff right now. So I'm excited to put those links in.
Excellent. I can't wait to see what my fire element has harvested come August. So I look forward to seeing you again at the beginning of August.
Thank you so much for coming today, and I will speak to you all soon. Thanks for listening to Creative Power today. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and consider leaving a review. To find out more ways you can connect or work with me, please visit www.camillafellisarnold.com/creative power.